My name is Barb Nangle. I'm the founder of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole: Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. This is episode 8, My Tools of Recovery series, part 1, Pausing. I talk about my top 3 tools quite often with others in recovery, so I think it makes sense to talk about them here. For me personally, my most important tools are pausing, reaching out, and focusing on me. Today, I'm going to talk about the pause. In the beginning of my recovery, it was my most important tool. And over time, that's still proven to be the case. Though now I would add breathing to that. Hard to believe, but we humans sometimes forget to breathe. And that breath, especially a purposeful and deep breath, can be the difference between disaster and serenity. But I have to pause in order to take that deep breath. There's a piece of recovery literature that says we pause when agitated or doubtful. And that sounds like a tiny little thing and maybe like it's not so important. But for me, it's turned out to be an incredibly important part of my development in recovery, especially for my peace and serenity. Getting to be able to pause was monumental for me, like climbing Mount Everest. I'd been a reactor my entire life, so learning to pause and respond instead of react was extremely difficult for me. Part of my inability to pause, I think, came from the sense of urgency I lived with at all times before recovery. I felt rushed all the time and like I had to have an answer for everything, even if I had to make it up. What I remember about learning to pause is that it, just like everything else in recovery, is a process and it takes time. There was a time in my early recovery where I would do something using my usual dysfunctional patterns. Then maybe, 2 weeks later, I'd realize, hey, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have done X. Then sometime later, I'd do something similar that wasn't the healthiest thing. And this time, maybe a week later, I'd realize, I probably shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have done this. And then maybe the next time, it would be just a few days between doing the thing and realizing there were other options besides what I did. As time went on, and I started to see the gap closing between the time I did something dysfunctional and the time I realized it was dysfunctional, I really started to see I had other options. I got excited because I thought, pretty soon I'm going to realize it immediately after the fact. And then hopefully as I'm doing it so I can stop. And then eventually I'll realize it before I do or say anything fucked up. Paying attention to this process really helped to sensitize me to the kinds of things I was doing or saying that weren't working out so great. So as the time gap closed between doing the thing and realizing it, I'd be on the lookout for situations that were likely to trigger my dysfunctional reactions. That is when pausing came in. Once I could see this is the exact kind of situation in which I would normally make things worse, how about I pause before doing or saying anything? What a relief to learn that I could pause, take a deep breath, and actually think about what I might do or say. Since learning to pause, I've come up with all kinds of phrases to allow for a pause. These tell both me and the other party involved that I need to pause. Some of them include, I'm going to have to think about that. Or, I'm not sure. Or, I don't know. That was huge. I somehow grew up with the idea that saying I don't know was practically cause for death. Another was, I'm going to have to get back to you. Or, I'm going to put a pause on that decision for now. So now I'm going to describe a couple of scenarios that really illustrate the process I went through as I learned to pause. The first scenario has to do with my last boyfriend before I got into recovery. We broke up about 6 months before my first 12-step meeting and would occasionally still stay in contact. He would email me pretty regularly, and pre-recovery, it looked something like this. Because I was working in an office and worked on a computer most of the day, I might open my personal email to check something. And if there was a message from him, I would feel compelled to open it right then. Not only would I open it immediately, I'd feel the need to respond to it immediately as well. And very often I'd get pissed off about it, whether it was getting pissed off about what he said or that he, quote, interrupted me during my workday. As time went on and I got into recovery, I started to understand that I didn't have to open his messages right then. That may sound odd to some of you, but I really didn't know that. Once I started learning to pause, the way I thought of it was like this. If I didn't have the psychic energy to open it, I'd wait until I did. When that time came, I'd open it and respond. Then eventually, I also realized that just as I can pause before opening the email, I can also pause before responding to the email. That way, I could be much more thoughtful in my reply. Interestingly, as time went on, my replies became shorter and shorter, and my tension decreased. I didn't feel the pressure I used to feel. Pressure to read, pressure to respond, pressure of being pissed off at him for interrupting me. And then it dawned on me that he wasn't interrupting me. I was. I was the one who was choosing to open his emails and then reacting to the contents. Once I learned to pause, I had much less tension and I started to see what my part was in all this. That I was choosing to open his messages during my workday. Mind you, it didn't feel like a choice for the longest time. It felt like something I just had to do. By the way, that's called a compulsion. But because of learning to pause, I came to see it as a choice and to stop blaming him for interrupting me. Can you say victim mentality? Another development that came from this process was that I learned to reach out to others for help. I reached out to others to have them read my replies before sending them, and I reached out to others to read his messages to determine if I really needed to read them. And I eventually came to realize I don't ever have to open his messages. Ever. I finally texted him, "I wish you all the best, but I'm not interested in a relationship with you." It took him years to stop contacting me. And it took me years to realize that I could actually block him from contacting me. As I did that, he'd find other avenues through which to contact me. And one time when I got a new phone, I didn't realize that I needed to re-block him, and he got through. But because of learning to pause, I just deleted his messages and I didn't get agitated. And also, as I said in my episode on acceptance, I realized this is what's happening. No sense fighting against what is or wishing it weren't that way. The next scenario I'm going to describe has to do with a much longer pause. It actually turned out to be a permanent pause, but I didn't know that that was going to be the case when I went into it initially. So the situation is that I was part of an organization that was thinking about merging with another organization. And we went through this really cool and incredible 2-year-long process of discerning whether or not we were going to merge. In the end, both organizations voted not to merge. And in my opinion, the reason that happened was because the leadership in my organization did some things I didn't care for. I didn't really feel right about it, and I decided I wasn't sure I wanted to go back there. Because I wasn't sure, I decided I was going to put a pause on that decision, and I didn't go back. I thought, if I go back to any organization, it's probably going to be the other one that we were going to merge with, but I don't know. And I really don't feel like I need to decide right now. Over time, I just kept saying to myself, I don't feel like going. I'm not sure what I want to do. And in the end, it turned out to be a permanent pause, and I never went back to either one of them. And it felt really good to allow myself the time to really think about what I want. I don't have to do anything. I get to do things. And pausing has really enabled me to do that. The other thing that pausing allows me to do, in addition to being able to use my thinking brain, is that pausing allows my higher power to enter into the situation. If I am constantly reacting to what is happening around me, I don't allow my higher power to enter the situation. More about that in the next episode. So that's my story about the pause, which is my number one tool of recovery to this day. Come back for the next 2 episodes in this series where I talk about my number 2 and 3 tools of recovery, reaching out and keeping the focus on me. Thank you so much. I hope this has been helpful. That's it for today. Be sure to subscribe and like this episode so you can get future episodes. And if you can think of someone who might benefit from hearing this particular episode, please be sure to share it with them. Thanks for listening.